What up? Let's begin. Hold on, boys. Just hold on. Uh, Set up my channel. There we go. Okay, it's working. Audio. I'm gonna be reacting to some more geography now. We shall do. Let's. Hmm. Let's do Bulgaria. Alright, boys. No, not this stupid ad. Yeah, we don't need ads. Anyway. Geography now is epic.
Bulgaria, Bulgaria, Bulgaria. Where have I heard that before? Oh yeah, Victor Crumb from the Harry Potter books. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, now you want to watch this episode, right?
It's time to learn geography.
No! Hey everybody, I'm your host Barbie. I'd like to take this moment to coin a term, tripster. A tripster is a travel hipster, someone who is so over the mainstream tourist destinations and they only prefer to go to the bleakest, most obscure regions of the planet. That being said, tripsters watching this video, take notes. Also, let's dissect the flag. The flag is a tricolor consisting of 3 equally sized horizontal bands, white, green, and red. When it comes to symbolism, even Bulgarians themselves aren't 100% sure exactly what each band means. However, it's generally accepted that they are inspired by the Pan-Slav nationalist movement colors. However, it's also kind of accepted that these are the definitions. The white represents love and peace and freedom and spirituality. The green represents the youthfulness as a new liberated state, agriculture, character, and the beauty of nature. And the red represents the valor and, once again, the blood spilled of those who fought for the country and for the heroes of Bulgaria. Okay, that was kind of easy. Moving on. Very few people actually know where Bulgaria is on a map, but when you look at it, you'll kind of realize that its position is...
It's weird to me that young kids in like all the big countries in Europe, like Russia, Germany, France, UK, Spain, never like the small ones. I don't know why.
is kind of important to the entire continent of Europe.
They don't teach us about that shit.
First of all, Bulgaria is located on the eastern part of the Balkan Peninsula, bordered by 5 other countries and the Black Sea to the east. Since Bulgaria is Europe's closest point to Turkey, it's kind of seen as like the crossroads between Europe and Asia. The capital is Sofia, located in the west, and the country is divided into 28 provinces, and the capital Sofia acts as its own province as well. Sofia has a wonderfully unique ambiance as a city that still retains its residue shavings from the former Soviet identity, but with a modern westernized democratic appeal that exudes through the billboards and media. About 80% of the border with Romania rests on the mighty Danube River, and the borders with Serbia, Macedonia, or the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, and Greece rest on the mountains and hills like the Balkan Range, the Pirin Range, and the Rhodope Range. Bulgaria is very lucky because in addition to having a nice geological mountainous shell to encapsulate the eastern side, they have a wonderful Black Sea to the east, which has played a heavily influential role in the development of the Bulgarian nation.
Can you guys hear it? Yeah, you guys can hear it.
The coast is classified as a humid subtropical climate zone with an abundance of pristine golden beaches, the most popular ones off the coast of Varna and Burgas. In the Black Sea, Bulgaria owns 5 small islands and islets, each named after a saint and each with a unique charm and backstory.
I guess the Bulgarians really like their saints. Anyways, you guys tell me one thing in the chat you know about Bulgaria. I would say, do not know. I would say like good food.
For example, St. Thomas Island is one of the only places in all of Bulgaria where cacti grow. St. Ivan Island, which supposedly has the remains of John the Baptist from the Bible, and St. Anastasia Island, which had a jail that prisoners escaped from long ago. Bulgaria's land comprises of a lot of history, to say the very least. In the south, by the Gorna Krepost, you have the Perperikon, the Thracian city ruins of the strange ancient culture of the Thracians. In Kazanluk, you have the Thracian tomb of Kazanlak. Yeah, the ancient culture of Thrace had kind of a lot to do with this area. Nobody quite exactly knows what the downfall of the Thracians were, but reading into historical accounts on how they acted on a regular basis, it's not that hard to speculate on.
I want to learn more about Thrace now, but we'll do that probably in like 2 videos.
A few probable theories.
We're sociopaths.
Yes, you are, Thrace. Yes, you are. Now, of course, the monuments tell a funny story, but the natural land formations get even crazier. The Bulgarians have a saying: when God divided up the nations amongst the people, the Bulgarians were late, so instead God gave them a piece of heaven. Now,
That's what a small nation between Moldova and Ukraine, you guys probably don't know. Transnistria. This open map. This is what they say in Transnistria. Whatever Transnistria is, this can load. I don't know why I don't know why I DuckDuckGo on here. But anyway, oh, images. Yeah, right here. Yeah, this is where Transnistria is. It's a breakaway from Moldova. Got like 600,000 people in it. It's pretty big. Anyways, keep going.
whether or not you agree or disagree with that, you can't deny the fact that Bulgaria does have some pretty nice grounds. First of all, the country is divided into two general topographical areas: the mountainous east with the Balkan, Rila, and Rhodopes ranges, and the low-lying flatter Danube Valley and the Gorno-Trakiska lowlands, in which multiple rivers and lakes can be found, in addition to the majority of agriculture plots and grazeland for livestock. Speaking of which, if there's one thing that Bulgarians are proud of, and I'm not even joking, every single Bulgarian I talked to has mentioned this, it would be their unique yogurt. Now,
They have unique yogurt. Like, I tried Bulgarian yogurt.
a lot of countries make great yogurt, and people will tell you that the Balkans was actually the birthplace of yogurt. However, Bulgaria is the only place in the world where the yogurt is fermented with the Lactobacillus bulgaricus culture that is only found in the air of Bulgaria. This bacterium gives the yogurt a distinct twang and flavor unlike any other yogurt, and with the milk coming from cows or sheep that typically graze off of high herb-rich pastures, enriching the product with even...
What'd you say? What'd you say? No thanks, I'm good. I'm good.
Anyways, let's keep doing
more
this.
health benefits. You come to Bulgaria, we don't mess with our dairy products. You buy it, you buy it. Of course, you also have the Black Sea, which Bulgaria has been dependent on for centuries for trade and business, but also has been capitalizing on for tourism. Many Europeans consider the Black Sea coast as kind of like their secret getaway spot that nobody really knows about because...
I forgot, Bulgaria is like NATO. I've heard that Bulgaria is the poorest country in the EU, but I don't know what I'm talking about.
everybody's so concerned about thinking that Barcelona and Nice are the only places that you can go to. Ugh, Valencia, I've been so over that for years. I prefer Burgos. Of course, you've probably never heard of that. Now, here's the cool
Burgas, pretty good place.
Because of natural borders by mountains in conjunction with wind and weather patterns and water flow, Bulgaria is home to a wide variety of entertainingly strange natural landmarks, such as the Belogradchik eroded rock cliffs, the stone mushrooms of Beliplast, the Popti Kamani stones. Also keep in mind the Popti Kamani area, in addition to the Tabernas region of Spain, is one of the only two naturally occurring deserts in all of Europe. And then we get to something that Bulgaria is definitely not in short supply of: caves and waterfalls. We reach places like the Devil's Throat Cave with the world's highest underground waterfall.
What?
Fall, the Devatashka cave with holes in its ceiling, the Eyes of God cave in Prohodna. In fact, Bulgaria has over 4,500 charted caves in its entire country. Also, keep in mind, 32 of the 37 species of bats in Europe call Bulgaria home. So if there's one thing you can take away from this, it's that Bulgaria is a very cavey place. Waterfalls also speckle the landscape, mostly in the eastern mountainous regions. The tallest one in the Balkans being the Resko Praskalo, the picturesque Krushuna Falls, and the town with the most fortunate fairy tale view, Vrasta, which has the Skaklia, a waterfall looming above their skyline on the mountain ever flowing from the cliffs adjacent to the direct vicinity of their town.
Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. I just can't even.
Now, if you ask Bulgarians, one more thing that they'll tell you that they're proud of is their roses. Roses are cultivated all
Yup. Bulgaria's national flower is the rose.
across the entire country, but most heavily in the Rose Valley just below the Balkan mountain range. Bulgaria produces over 70% of the world's rose oil, a substance used by pressing on the petals and also most commonly used in perfumery. They have so many roses that typically the abundance allows them to have rose festivals in which they parade around with roses, have a rose queen beauty contest, and they kind of just end up dancing around and throw roses all over the place.
No nudity.
Kind of like the La Tomatina festival in Spain, except it's a lot cleaner and more better smelling. Wow, that's the second time we've contrasted Bulgaria with Spain. Let's see if there's any more parallels in. Now, Bulgarians may be Slavic, well, kind of, we'll explain more about that in a bit, but they definitely have their own Bulgarian way of doing things. Bulgaria has a population of about 7.5 million people, most of whom identify as ethnically Bulgarian, at about 85%, 9% of the population being Turks, about 5% are Roma, commonly referred to as Gypsies, making Bulgaria the country with the third highest Gypsy population, and the remainder of the country coming from other nationalities. Now, here's the sad thing. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, Bulgaria has one of the highest population declines in the world. They used to have around 9 million people back in 1990, but since then the emigration and death rate has surged past the population growth rate, and since then Bulgaria has seen a rather alarming population decline in the past few decades. This all had to do partially with company privatization and the social structure investments going completely out of whack after independence from the former Soviet Union. Statistics project that about 60,000 people leave Bulgaria every year, and in 2012, 24 towns were completely wiped off the map as they were completely abandoned, and about 170 towns are on the verge of extinction. The good news though is that this makes Bulgaria one of the perfect places for cheap shopping, real estate, business, and cheap vacation getaways. In fact, since recently joining the EU and NATO, which has by the way caused a lot of controversy, Bulgaria has seen a completely unprecedented level of tourism and business booming. Yeah, economic nerds, Bulgaria is the kind of place where you might want to consider pulling a Warren Buffett. I'm just saying. Ethnic Bulgarian people will tell you that they have roots from the Bulgar tribes, which nomadically came from the eastern regions of Eurasia, as far speculated as the Central Asian regions, until they eventually settled down into what is now known as modern Ukraine. Eventually they came down and mixed in with the Slavs and formed Bulgaria. So technically, a lot of people in Bulgaria could have Central Asian roots, and considering how far the Huns extended their reaches, that's not completely out of the question. Culture-wise, Bulgaria is proud to proclaim itself as the birthplace of the Cyrillic alphabet, used by over 250 million people in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, extending as far as Mongolia. Used by over 250 million people in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, extending as far as Mongolia. Oh, and one more thing, just like we talked about in an earlier video, like some regions in Albania, Bulgaria is one of the only few places in the world where people shake their head to say yes and nod their heads to say no. Now,
Wait, when I was a little kid, I always thought you always would nod your head yes and shake your head no.
now let's talk about the people Bulgaria interacts with. Now, Bulgaria has one of the most anomalous core of companions that you would never really expect them to engage with comfortably. First off, the strange thing is, in 2004, in addition to other former Soviet states, Bulgaria took a bold step and joined NATO, and 3 years later joined the EU. This was kind of a big deal considering the Soviet-linked past and the ties that Bulgaria was rooted in. This move also opened up Bulgaria's diplomacy to unparalleled standards that they never really had before. All this kind of puts Bulgaria in a very unique intercessory class status when it comes to East versus West. Typically, Bulgaria will kind of act as like a mediator for the EU and NATO when it comes to cross-operational engagements. When it comes to the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, commonly referred to as just Macedonia, Bulgaria has a strange relationship. By all means, these two countries speak the same language and have pretty similar backgrounds as Slavic nations. The problem is where things went down about 80 years ago. Basically, this is what Bulgaria says. Look, Macedonia, we want to love you guys. You're basically just Bulgarians, but you've been brainwashed by Georgy Pilevsky into thinking you have some kind of indigenous Hellenistic roots. words. You don't. You're Bulgarians. Just accept it. To which the Macedonians say, shut up, Bulgaria. You don't know us. Okay, we are descended from Alexander the Great. You belong to Macedonia. I don't want to say it's kind of like the North-South Korea thing because it's nowhere near that level of animosity, but in a fundamental sense, ideologically, it is kind of like the North-South Korea thing. They generally do not favor Turkey that much because for 500 years they were under the Ottoman Empire, and they pretty much hated every second of it. It wasn't until the 19th century when they finally gained their independence with the help of the Russians fighting alongside with them. This means that Russia is kind of seen as like the brother friend of Bulgaria. Even though in every aligned organizational sense they kind of took every step away from Russia, and even though they were kind of taken over by the Soviets for a long time, tensions are low and they still get along great. However, Romania is kind of seen as like the new boyfriend that Bulgaria just started dating. Especially after joining the EU, relations grew fast, the presidents regularly visit each other and hang out, business is great, ferries and bridges connect the two countries across the Danube, where people love to visit each other, and Romanian-Bulgarian marriages are not uncommon. In conclusion, wax your mustaches and put on your skinny jeans, because if you are so over the mainstream, you might want to just stop by and smell the roses. Stay tuned, Burkina Faso is coming up next.
That was epic. Oh, do we want to do... Hold on, let's... Let's do Japan. Yeah, no, we're not. Yeah, well... I need an ad blocker.
This is one country I barely have to introduce you to. Let's just get it over with. Sushi, geishas, karate, temples, ramen, anime, sumos, weird stuff, weird cosplay, poison fish, and I'm not even gonna ask about that. Dewa, ikimashou!
It's time to learn geography.
Now!
What's one thing you know about Japan besides anime? Put it in chat.
Hey everybody, I'm your host Barbs. We have reached
I would say Pokemon. No, that's an anime. I'll take ramen.
the land of the rising sun, Asia's island powerhouse, and home to a culture that I'm sure you've heard of. Let's just jump into it. Ah, Japan, you have such a story behind you. First of all, Japan is located right off the east coast of the Asian continent between the Pacific Ocean and the Sea of Japan, stretching all the way from the Sea of Okhotsk in the north with the East China Sea to the south. The country is divided into 47 prefectures, each with incredibly beautifully minimalistic style flags. The prefectures are divided into 4 different categories: Ken, To, Fu, and Do. The first level, Ken, Ken, refers to the 43 plain prefectures. Then you have To, which means something like metropolis, and this category only applies to Tokyo.
What? Bro, Tokyo is so big. They have like a population larger than Canada. 38 million people living in Tokyo. This is
City.
crazy.
Fu refers to the urban prefectures, which applies only to the cities of Osaka and Kyoto. And finally, Do, which is a unique category translating to something like circuit, and it applies to all of Hokkaido in the north. Speaking of which, Tokyo, Japan's capital, is the largest city in the world with its greater metropolitan area, including Kanto, containing about 37.
Aisha. It's 20. That was 20. Population of Tokyo. One graphic. Oh, it's. Ooh. I mean, its peak was 2017. Yeah, its population's been declining because there's so many people there. That's their peak. And then this is where they're at right now. Wow. That's epic.
Million people. That's more than the entire population of Canada. However, Tokyo is kind of like 23 smaller cities all smashed into one, divided into units called wards. And the closest thing to a capital one would probably be Chiyoda, where the Emperor, Prime Minister, and Supreme Court are located. After the greater Tokyo Kanto region, you have the next largest cities, Osaka and Nagoya, coming in at third. Keep in mind, about 90% of people in Japan live in cities, and the vast majority on Honshu and Kyushu. The busiest airports, of course, being Tokyo's 2 twins, Haneda, which is actually in Tokyo, and Narita International, which is like an hour-and-a-half drive away outside of Tokyo. Then you have Osaka's Kansai International, kicks, and Fukuoka International on Kyushu. Gotta keep it clean, Keith. Speaking of
Yep.
which, Japan is made up of about 6,850 islands, but about 97% of the land is made up of 4 main islands: Honshu, Kyushu, Shikoku, and Hokkaido. South of the main 4, you have the Ryukyu island chain, which extends just south of Kyushu, partially making up the Okinawa prefecture. You've probably heard of Okinawa. It's where Uma Thurman got that sword that she used to kill Lucy Liu. It's also where these 2 islands... never mind. Nonetheless, Japan can still kind of be separated into 10 historical main regions, 6 of which divided amongst Honshu. Then you have the interesting, less highlighted Kuro Island dispute with Russia in the north. Basically, Russia administers all of them, but Japan claims these 2 islands closest to Hokkaido, Iturup or Etorofuto, and Kunashir or Kunashiri, which is only like less than 10 miles away from Hokkaido. On a clear day, you can even see it from the coast, but it's like, nope, Russia. They even have a statue of Lenin. The Russians and Japanese have kind of had a long dispute over this area. At one point, Japan even tried to take over all of Sakhalin in the 1800s. Then you have the Dokdo Takeshima Island dispute between them and South Korea. To this day, South Korea has a patrol building built on the island, and they fiercely guard it. And finally, you have Okinotorishima, which is probably the loneliest place in Japan, as a shallow reef in the middle of the ocean. It looks like it's trying so hard to become an island, complete with 3 helipads and a research station. There's no diplomatic dispute, but rather a dispute within the UN on whether or not it qualifies as land for an exclusive economic zone in the ocean. Phew, okay, alright, that kind of took forever. Getting around in Japan is incredibly easy, often touted as having the best public transportation system in the world. They have highways and trains everywhere, even one that cuts through an office building, as well as the Shinkansen bullet train system that can get you to virtually every corner of Honshu and Kyushu, as well as the bottom tip of Hokkaido, but not Shikoku. If you want to go to Shikoku, you have to take the slower local Seto Ohashi line across the Seto Bridge. Yeah, Shikoku is kind of like the runt of the...
Japan's basically just a giant railway. It so many people there, it must suck to be in like a traffic jam. Yeah, trains very much revolutionized transportation.
The litter in Japan. Basically, Japan is like one big massive machine, constantly running and moving with flashing neon lights, vending machines, and robots, and everything. Everything! Even the garbage cans have cartoons everywhere. Anyway, some notable places of interest might include Tokyo Skytree, the 2nd tallest building in the world, Miyajima Pagoda, Matsumoto Himeji and Osaka castles, the Fushimi Inari Shrine, the Great Buddha Hall, Nakagin Capsule Tower, the Vine Bridges of Iya Valley, the Ramen Museum.
Holy crap. There's a lot of stuff.
So many weird themed restaurants and hot springs. The self-mummified monks of Sokushin Butsu, that hotel run by robots, the Ninja Museum in Iga, Kanmanga
I want to become a ninja. Bro, I gotta move to Japan.
Fuji Lava Buddhas, the restricted access Ise Grand Shrine, the most significant of all Shinto shrines, the Shirakawa Go traditional village, armed with water cannons to protect itself from fires, abandoned theme parks like
That's smart.
Greenland and Nara Dreamland, Kochiya Hill with red cypress, and the national treasure Itsukushima Shrine, featured on numerous pieces of art, films, and even banknotes. Now, despite the bustling metropolis regions and skyscrapers, Japan does an incredible job at maintaining its natural integrity. Find out how in... Now, Japan's land is kind of like a gingerbread house. Beautiful on the outside, but potentially dangerous on the inside. First of all, Japan is a stratovolcanic archipelago located right on the most precariously situated section where 4 major tectonic plates converge: the Pacific, the Philippine, the Eurasian, and the North American plates. Of course, this means that not only is Japan subject to earthquakes, but also tsunamis, which, by the way, is a Japanese word. Tsunami.
Tsunami is a Japanese word. I learned that when I was like 5.
From sub-oceanic activities such as the one recently in Fukushima caused by the epicenter in the Japan Trench off the Pacific. This also means that Japan is a volcanic area with numerous volcanoes still active, like Aogashima, a volcano within a volcano, Mount Aso, the largest volcanic caldera. This in return also blesses Japan with countless natural hot springs, which they like to exploit and build bathhouses on, called onsen, typically indicated with this symbol. All this plate activity and volcanoes means that about 70% of Japan is mountainous, with the highest peak, Mount Fuji, overlooking
Mount Fuji. Beautiful place. It's like beautiful. Let's keep going.
Tokyo, which by the way is still technically an active volcano which erupted about 300 years ago. The rift between the Philippine plate and the Eurasian plate creates the Japanese Alps, which bisects the country on Honshu. This isolated geologic war zone in return, though, kind of blesses Japan with an... Tokyo, which by the way is still technically an active volcano which erupted about... The rift between the Philippine plate and the abundance of unique flora and fauna. Today, about 70% of Japan is forested with nice natural water sources, like the longest river, the Shinano, and the largest lake, Lake Biwa on Honshu. Endemic animals can be found like Japanese hornets, macaque monkeys, tanukis, giant salamanders, bobtail cat, sero, red fox, red crowned crane, the national dog, the Shiba Inu, the national
Shiba Inu is a very nice dog. But isn't there like one island in Japan that is full of cats? Or is that a different place? I can't
bird, the green
remember.
pheasant, and the national fish, koi. Speaking of animals, Japan has quite a few feral animal islands and towns, such as Tashirojima, the cat
Yep, I'm right. I want to go there. Look at all them cats, though. Bro, that's a lot of cats. I mean,
Island, Okunoshima, the rabbit island, the town of Miyajima for deer, Miyagizao for foxes, and of course Jigoku Dani, where you can see those monkeys in hot springs. With limited space and only about 20% highly subsidized arable land, Japan has kind of had to think outside the box. So they said, hey, why not go to the sea? Today, Japan is disputably the most advanced aquaculture society on the planet. Not only do they have the largest merchant marine
yep, this is with them.
fleet in the world, but they also harvest everything from shellfish to seaweed in offshore ocean plots and fish farms. They love fish. They even have the largest fish market in the world.
They overfish, which means the fish population there is dying out. They even have to they even kill just for food.
Tsukiji. Speaking of which, we all know about Japanese food. I feel like I don't even really have to give you a list of notable dishes like sushi, mochi, or ramen. However, Japan is known for making strange flavors of conventional snacks,
What the?
drinks, and desserts, such as yogurt Pepsi,
Yogurt Pepsi?
spaghetti popsicles, horse and octopus ice cream,
What?
pancake juice, wasp crackers, and
What? Japanese people are strange.
Cat has tried pretty much anything under the
Boy,
sun. Itadakimasu! Speaking of which,
I mean, Japanese soda is actually also pretty good.
Japan is the third largest world economy by nominal GDP, mostly due to their various technology and automotive industries that have swept over the world by storm since the middle of the 20th century. The largest automotive companies include Toyota, Mitsubishi, Honda, Nissan, Mazda, Suzuki, and Subaru, as well as tech
Yep.
companies and their subsidiaries like Hitachi, Sony, Epson, Canon, Toshiba,
Everyone's heard of Sony, Canon, and Toshiba.
Fujitsu, Panasonic, Nikon, and Nintendo.
Nintendo as well.
This does, however, cause a problem. Japan is classified as a high throwaway society in which lots of resources get unnecessarily used and tossed. Like, come on, Japan, I know you have aesthetic standards, but seriously, I don't need one apple in vacuum-sealed plastic wrap. Nonetheless, Japan is often seen as one of, if not
They have a lot of robots.
the world leader in robotics and tech science, receiving more Nobel Prizes in science than any other Asian country. And it's kind of impressive. I mean, with a high population and limited space, Japanese people know how to consolidate and innovate. Speaking of Japanese people. Now, Japanese people are like, you never know what they're going to come up with next. You know it's probably going to be a little weird, but you're still going to be a little interested in it. First of all, the country has about 127 million people and is the 10th most populous country in the world. However, Mexico is getting really close to beating them. The country is incredibly homogenous, with over 98% of the populace identifying as ethnically Japanese, while the remainder is mostly made up of Koreans, Chinese, and very small Caucasian minorities of Americans and Europeans, and the indigenous Ryukyu and Ainu peoples.
I cannot wait for the U.S. geography now. Jesus, that's gonna be hard.
They use the Japanese yen as their currency. They surprisingly use the Type A American-style plug outlet, and they drive on the left side.
Why drive on the left? You should drive on the right. Driving on the left just means no left. You should drive on
Side of the road. As mentioned, like 8 seconds ago, Japan has two main indigenous ethnic groups, each with their own languages. You have the Ainu, which predominantly inhabit Hokkaido and some of the Kuril Islands administered by Russia, known for their rustic, scruffy features where men grew beards and women used to tattoo their lips and arms. Today, there are less than 30,000 left, but some estimate that there could be up to 200,000 if you include the other Ainu that have assimilated into the rest of Japan and are kind of faintly aware of their own culture. Otherwise, you have the Ryukyu people, or the Okinawans, which are kind of like the Hawaiians of Japan, known for their own distinct art and traditions and beliefs. Now, everybody in the world has had at least a little bit of exposure to some kind of Japanese culture, whether it be samurais, geishas, sumos, kabuki, shamisen music, kimonos, and excessively weird products and advertisements aimed at using nonconformity as a hook to engage viewers. But apart from all that flashy Japan stuff, let's look at the basics first. Japan, no surprise, speaks Japanese, which is actually not that hard to learn conversationally, but it's a nightmare when it comes to writing. The Japanese language uses 3 alphabets: hiragana, katakana, and kanji. Technically 4 if you include romaji, but that's kind of like for lazy people. The first two, hiragana and katakana, are syllabaries made up of 46 corresponding base characters each. That means you have 2 ways to write each syllable, whereas kanji is basically the list of Chinese characters that they borrowed from China. Most students have to learn about 2,000 to 3,000 of these. That means that Chinese people can kind of get by in Japan just by reading the signs, as most of the characters have identical meanings, just different pronunciations. It's kind of hard to explain, but the reason why they use 3 alphabets is because each one kind of plays a role for certain words and context. They don't use spaces in writing, so each alphabet kind of acts as like word dividers, and katakana is used for technical and foreign words. Well, why don't they just fix the problem by using spaces and discard the other 2 alphabets? Shut up! That's why. If you didn't grow up here and actually learn this stuff, you're either obsessed with Japan or criminally insane. Sorry, I'm boring the crap out of you guys with language stuff. Anyway, let's talk about history. Now, I'm sure many of you have seen that video by Bill Wirtz, whom I am totally not jealous of, considering that he racked up more views and subscribers in 2 videos than I have in all these years of working on this channel. But in the quickest way I can summarize it, Yayoi period, Kofun period, Yamato
Go watch Bill Wirtz, but language warning from him.
unite Japan, Asuka regime, Chinese culture comes in, Heian period, aristocrats take over, Kamakura period, aristocrats lose, Shogun time, province wars, Azuchi Momoyama period, things are stable, Meiji restoration, industrialization, World War I, Japan's economy sucks, coup d'etats and assassination attempts against the emperor, military rule, they try to make an empire and in World War II attack Pearl Harbor, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, afterwards treaties signed, military kind of dismantled, and post-war economic miracle, done! Japan definitely sticks out from every country on Earth, and it's partially because of their belief system. Japan is the only country in the world that practices Shintoism, which obviously enough started in Japan. If you don't know anything about Shintoism, basically it's a very ritualistic belief system that reveres a multitude of kami, which translates to something along the lines of gods or spirits or essence. It's hard to explain, but basically a kami can be manifested in almost anything and everything. There are kami for harvest, kami for war, kami for good luck, and so on. Today, about 80% of Japanese people practice Shinto to some extent, whether it be going to temples or shrines and lighting incense and praying. However, most of them will not say that they identify as Shintoists, since there are no formal rituals to deem yourself a practitioner. Otherwise, about 35% might say that they identify as Buddhists, and a small 3% are Christians. Today, there are about 81,000 Shinto shrines and about 85,000 appointed Shinto priests all over the country. Technically, Shintoism is also important because it's claimed that the emperor is a direct descendant of Amaterasu, the goddess of the sun, which means the emperor has the highest authority in Shintoism. Though today, it's more seen as like a moral tradition and patriotic practice rather than believing that the emperor actually has divine status. Oh yeah, and Japan has an imperial family with Akihito holding the throne since 1989, and to this day Japan is the only country with an emperor. Some people will say that Shintoism is partially the reason why Japan also has a vibrant, complex industry of cartoons and anime, many of which inspired from Shinto-driven legends and kami. They often rank as the top video game producing and playing country in the world. Everybody knows Mario, Sonic, and Pikachu. In a sense, Japanese people have always admittedly kind of been escapists, creating their own worlds, and it might be due to their long history of diplomatic isolation. In another sense, though, honor and diligence culture is of huge importance. Having a degree and respectable title is always flaunted. The problem, though, is that Japan has the largest aging population in the world, in which over 26% of the country is 65 or older. In contrast, only about 12.4% are 1 to 14 years old. Sociologists have many theories as to why this is, but in addition to a high depression rate, there seems to be a lack of sexual interest amongst millennials, especially for men. They even have a word for it, soshoku danshi, or herbivores. On top of that, Japan has a very strict and conservative approach towards immigration and citizenship. So ultimately, a smaller generation has to lift the burden of taking care of a population almost 10 times their size. Any Japanese people are overworked. They even have a word for that, karoshi. Some wonder how the future will look like.
Hey son, can you help me cross the street?
Ooh, I would, but you never had a son, so I don't exist. Good luck! Now you are so into building robots. There's so much more we could talk about, like how Japan has a strong history in martial arts, folklore, and regional festivals, but this video is already getting long and I have to cut it down. Some notable people of Japanese descent might include people like Emperor Hirohito, Fukuzawa Yukichi, Honda Tadakatsu, Kukai, Maeda Toshie, Tokugawa Ieyasu, Murasaki Shikibu, Saifo Takamori, Akira Kurosawa, Hayao Miyazaki, Soichiro Honda, Miyoshi Umeki, Hibari Misora, Rinko Kikuchi, Osamu Danzai, Kei Nishikori, Ayumi Hamasaki, Takeshi Hitano, Masayoshi Son, Akira Toriyama, Sadako Ogata, Taiho Koki, Masako Katsura, Ichiro Suzuki, Hane Mori, Ken Watanabe, Downtown Duo, Keisuke Honda, and Shinji Kagawa. Now, due to their history, Japan has always kind of been like a lone wolf, but over time, they learned how to open up. And let's find out how in the last segment, So Japan is a pretty big player on the world stage. As a member of the G20, G8, IMF, WHO, UN, EAS, Interpol, and like 400 other acronyms. They know diplomacy pretty well. They get along with Brazil, Peru, and the Philippines pretty well, as each country contains many Japanese communities. And in addition, lots of people from these countries either visit or work in Japan. Peru even had a Japanese president. As mentioned in the France episode, Japan kind of sees France as like the epitome of European exoticism. And after English, French is one of the most highly desired languages to learn, although good luck considering how every French word kind of ends in a continent. The Pacific Island nations of Palau, Kiribati, and Marshall Islands still hold close ties, even though Japan kind of occupied them during the first half of the 20th century. Japanese people love visiting and provide business and revenue for these countries. Their biggest frenemies are South Korea and China. These three are like the Asian trifecta, dominating most of the business and affairs in the East. Despite Japan having invaded and occupying these two for decades, my own grandmother was actually raised in Japanese-occupied Korea, and to this day she still speaks fluent Japanese. They've mostly moved on, plus the whole North Korea thing kind of makes South Korea and Japan closer. The youth of today love piggybacking off of each other's cultures. Koreans and Japanese admit it, they can't get enough of Japanese anime and video games, whereas the Japanese are obsessed with K-pop, and you know, they kind of got kanji and Buddhism from China, so there's that. In terms of their best friends, however, interestingly enough though, most of the Japanese people I've talked to have said the USA and Taiwan. Even though they don't officially recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state, on paper, they totally act like they do and stand with them on pretty much any diplomatic measure. Taiwan was actually the longest lasting occupied area under Japanese rule during the Empire years, and they have since then still kept close. Even though the pains of World War II will never be forgotten, it's funny because almost immediately after that, the US and Japan started skipping down the street hand in hand. The US kind of felt like a duty to make reparations since they were already communities of Japanese Americans, especially in Hawaii and California. My hometown, Los Angeles, has a little Tokyo, so they invested tons of money in Japan after the war, and in the 50s, Japan started booming in every industry. Culture cues were adopted on both sides. McDonald's opened up in Tokyo, 7-Eleven opened up in the US. They love burgers and Chris Evans, and we have nerds living in their mom's basements rewatching every season of Naruto Shippuden with ill-fitting cosplay outfits. In conclusion, the land of the rising sun has always kind of figured that the best way for them to open up to the world was to create their own worlds with wild imaginations driven by technology, yet still beautifully preserving the ancient, vibrant values of their ancestors. Oh, and by the way, this episode was brought to you by Bob Saget's Bear Sharktopus coffee shoes. Watashi wa kohito kutsu ga hoshi. Let's super harassment sandwich! Stay tuned. Jordan is coming up next.
Alright, yeah, I got one. I know something right here. Yeah, watch this.
At iHerb, we
I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Joachim from Sabaton, and this is Sabaton History.
The Battle of Shiroyama was a major turning point in Japanese history, where the samurai, heavily outnumbered, made a heroic stand and counterattack against the Japanese.
You know, my name is actually Japanese. My name means samurai without a master, Ronin. And yeah, Ronins are badass samurais, no master, which is epic. Anyways, let's continue.
Japanese army, showing their legendary skills for the world to see in their final fight.
And our song Shiroyama is not only about that battle, but also a tribute to the ancient code of honor Bushido.
Now, in a minute, he's going to tell you a bit about the song, but first, I'm going to tell you the history.
In the 7th century, Japan took a major step towards an era of feudalism with a series of reforms.
You guys hear this? Yeah, you guys.
Not really going to go into it here, but these not only reformed the classes, they also redistributed land among local lords, who in turn taxed much of the local population to live and work on said land. Over the centuries, those feudal lords eventually became rich and powerful.
Yep.
Though that was not the reform plan, and the emperors became more or less figureheads. To defend their position and their wealth, the lords depended upon skilled warriors who called themselves bushi. We call them samurai. The lords built their power bases with their own private armies, and early medieval Japan saw clans and families rise and fall as they fought for power. A new era began in the late 12th century when a clan leader named Yoritomo seized power and proclaimed himself shogun, and this elevated the importance of the bushi to a higher level. As the military arm of Japan, a new warrior caste was officially born. The era of the samurai would last for hundreds of years, and you can look up all the ups and downs of the power of the shoguns versus the regional warlords, the daimyo, for yourselves. The samurai were not simply armed thugs that pushed around the locals, not for the most part anyhow. They usually bound their lives to a code of honor and merit. One such set of rules to live by, next to the Book of Five Rings and the Hagakure, was the Bushido. The Bushido speaks of a code of morality and principles that every honorable samurai must follow to be respected and valued in Japanese society. Central themes, next to the mastery of martial arts, are honesty, dignity, and loyalty to their master.
It's the nature of time that the old ways must give in. It's the nature of time that the new ways comes in sin.
Well into the 19th century, the samurai class, within the rigid Japanese class system, remained powerful and enjoyed the privileges given them by the daimyo. But as the 19th century progressed, the shogunate was challenged by new ideas and social reforms, and was finally toppled by the imperial Meiji Restoration in 1868. Mutsuhito, the Meiji emperor, aimed to revolutionize Japan by adopting Western ideals. He pushed democratic reforms and established a constitutional monarchy. This broke the feudal structure and sabotaged the existence of the samurai. By abandoning the old caste system, and caste isn't really the right word, but class isn't really either. Anyhow, hundreds of thousands of samurai, some sources say up to 2 million, were suddenly out of a job, and worse for them, they were now socially equal to the common man, as the law now made all men commoners. This turned the whole social hierarchy upside down. Japan was by then under increasing pressure from the Western colonial powers. European and American ships were already probing the Far East to exploit potential weaknesses, and Japan had to shed its old skin and enter the modern era or fall behind, opening the country to modern technology and ideas. By any standard, Meiji saved Japan from the fate of the continental Southeast Asian states that ended up either colonized or torn apart like China. His main foreign policy achievement was to strengthen Japan to the point that they could resist the unequal treaties. The reforms he carried out on the home front contributed to this substantially. The emperor's new conscript army, for example, would rely on mass firepower instead of individual skill with the sword, and it would answer only to the central government, with no allegiances to local lords. There were many powerful clan leaders that supported the emperor as it was their traditional duty. One such man was Saigo Takamori. He had played a large part in the Meiji Restoration.
You just heard about him in geography now.
And supported modernizing Japan's military. But he also hoped the samurai could still hold on to their power in the countryside. This was not to be, and Saigo left his post as an imperial military advisor and retreated to his own domain of Satsuma, Kagoshima, on the southern Japanese island of Kyushu.
As a new age begins, the way of the warrior comes to an end. As a new age begins, the ways of old must apprehend.
Now, he was opposed to the new structures of Japanese society, but did not seek a confrontation with the emperor's rule. Instead, he kept the ideas of Bushido and the samurai alive in his own schools and dojos. Side note here, contrary to popular belief, the samurai did adopt new technologies. In fact, Clan Satsuma was famous for its artillery school. Okay. It was soon obvious that imperial officials loyal to Saigo were unofficially supplying his schools with ammunition and military-grade weapons, and this raised deep concerns at the imperial high court. Investigators were sent out, and these openly accused Saigo of preparing a rebellion. This was an insult to Saigo's students, and some of them committed local acts of violence against government officials. By 1877, this spiraled into open war between the samurai forces of Satsuma and the Imperial Japanese Army. Saigo gathered warriors and students loyal to him and marched out of Kagoshima in early February to meet the approaching imperial army in the field. But he made a strategic mistake that doomed the rebellion from the start. He wanted to first take Kumamoto Castle, one of the strongest castles in all of Japan, north of his realm of influence. He thought it would surrender to him without a fight, but the officers of the castle remained loyal to the emperor. As he laid siege to the castle in winter conditions, the imperial army arrived. Both sides were initially around 10,000 troops each, and for 2 months the battles raged, mostly in close combat with swords and bayonets, and the losses were in the thousands. But the imperial army, under General Aritomo Yamagata, an old colleague and friend of Saigo, could easily replace conscripts by the hundreds, while samurai warriors, who had trained their whole lives with their weapons, could not do so at all. Despite their far greater skill on an individual level, the rebels were forced to retreat. Still, it was a fighting retreat, and the remaining samurai waged a relentless guerrilla war, but they could not run forever. By September, it was only Saigo and 400 of his samurai who managed to slip through the imperial lines and make their way back to their capital of Satsuma, taking refuge on the heights of Hill Shiroyama. It did not take long for the Imperials to catch up, and General Yamagata was determined to finally capture Saigo and crush the rebellion once and for all. He ordered his men, some 30,000 strong by this point, to lay siege to the heights. They surrounded Shiroyama with a complex system of earthworks, trenches, and barricades. Yamagata sent out an envoy with a letter demanding Saigo's unconditional surrender. That letter shows the deep affection and respect the imperial general held for his friend, and you can read the letter in the description. Saigo, true to the nature of Bushido, could not accept surrender and denied Yamagata's request. See, for the samurai, surrendering was the most shameful thing they could do. A warrior was not just remembered by how he lived, fought, and served. He was also judged by the way he met his end. Death, even in defeat, could be the most honorable and glorious act of a samurai's life. And after all, death is inevitable, but giving up or losing heart in the face of defeat is not, and is unacceptable. Knowing the end was near, Saigo and his men spent their final days singing songs, writing poetry, and playing games, while the imperial army prepared its assault. Its artillery began to fire at midnight as September 24th began. The samurai wished each other farewell and shared a last cup of sake. At 3 a.m., imperial infantry stormed up the hill. The samurai charged, forcing them into close combat. Now, they could not hope to match the skill of the samurai, and took huge casualties, and their lines fell into disarray, but numbers were on their side. By 6 a.m., only 40 of the samurai were still alive. Saigo himself had been mortally wounded, probably from a bullet to the stomach or the hip, though that is uncertain. The legend goes that he was carried back up the hill by one of his closest friends. As they found a quiet spot, Saigo turned one last time in the direction of the imperial palace, bowed, and then got to his knees. He committed seppuku, the traditional suicide, by slicing the abdomen open to preserve his honor. His friend cut off Saigo's head with one stroke and hid it somewhere on the mountain. In the morning sun of September 24th, 1877, the remaining 40 samurai met their fate in one final suicidal charge into the imperial lines. All of them were cut down by gunfire. The defeat at Shiroyama not only meant the end of the Satsuma Rebellion, but the end of the samurai. Japan had entered a new era where such warriors had no place. From now on, the Japanese would wage war with an army made of recruits from all classes and all backgrounds. Saigo Takamori remains a tragic hero whose dedication and
that letter. Read it. Alright, as the young leader of vigorous men of the nation and resisting great and resisting a great mouth broke. And no, stupid mouse, I'm gonna break it. Resisting a great and famous army through many fierce battles, your fame is already well enough known to the world. But now most of your brave generals are dead or injured, and your military power is daily growing weaker. It is already clear that last that as last year's Satsuma army is unable to keep its fear. Don't know what further things you can hope to achieve, except a hopeless defense battle if you, Saigo, rather than lengthening the rest of your days a little, prefer to cause hundreds and thousands of dead and wounded from both armies. There's nothing that I, Aritomo, can say to you. I beg you to judge for yourself as you hold matters in the palm of your hand. That you will save both armies from death and injury. Ah, you are a man famous and known in the world. About our national constitution, naturally, it is not only Aritomo who knows what you really think, but the matter has been settled over many years of public debate. I, Aritomo, earnestly beg you, as your old friend, writing this, my tears fall like rain, and I cannot express myself at all. Please sympathize with this, the sincerity of my pain. Letters.
And skill will always be remembered as examples of the best of his kind, the samurai, and his code, the Bushido.
More thunder. No, this is. No, that's not.
Shiroyama, the song, obviously is going to have a certain meaning for Japanese fans and stuff. Do you guys play in Japan?
Yes, we played there 4 times since 2015, actually.
All right, Tokyo!
And what about before that?
Never.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
we never had the timing. We always wanted to go, but it just never happened.
But the song Shiroyama, that was sort of an unexpected, like, big crowd pleaser for you guys, right?
Yeah, I was really happy because I really liked the song. It's got this kind of 80s movie theme, vibe to it. Not only the Japanese, but fans from all over the world took it sort of to their hearts. So even while we were on the Last Stand tour, which Shiroyama is from, it actually made its way to the encores at the end because it was so popular. And that is...
Really? Not being a single?
Yeah,
That's
not
still
being a single.
But that's what people wanted.
And from the new album,
Yeah.
So thank you for that, fans. That was...
So what would an encore be on the Last Stand tour? How many, 2 or 3 songs? What do you guys do as an encore?
On the last run of this tour, we did usually Primo Victoria as the first one could be, and then into Shiroyama, and then finishing up with To Hell and Back.
To Hell and Back.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. See, now you guys learned something that you did not know about Sabaton. Although some of you probably did know that.
Yes.
So,
Everyone who went to the concerts, actually.
yeah, everyone's like, I went. Okay, sorry. All right. Well, once again, Shiroyama is on the Last Stand album.
And that's all for today.
But we will see you next time and every time on Sabaton History.
All right, soldiers, you know the drill. Subscribe. Sabaton History, regular Sabaton.
Yep, go sub to Sabaton History and Sabaton. Alright. Let's listen. Let's watch more geography now. Let's do Slovenia.
A long time ago, one of you guys sent me this shirt. I made it into a gym shirt, and I don't know, I guess I'm a big deal in Slovenia. Nah, but for real. Slovenia, our last and final Balkan country.
Well, actually, the Thracian Peninsula that connects to.
Oh my god, can you please just let me have this one moment? No, but for real, if there was ever a country that could fit nowhere, yet everywhere all at once, it would probably be Slovenia. Welcome to the Switzerland of the Balkans.
I'll see.
It's time to learn geography.
Alright, I'm gonna change this shirt. Oh, what's this? Yes, you can get a Geography Now shirt at geographynow.com. It's not selling out if it's my merch. Anyway, hey everybody, I'm your host Barbs. Well, we've said this many times before, but if the Balkans were family, it would kind of be like...
Slovenia, come join us.
Oh, what? Oh, yeah, no, I'm good with this wine. Okay. Wie auch immer, ich habe Düsseldorf besucht und...
What the Du German wannabe.
You're a fake.
Ich habe ein anderes Haus gekauft und... Yeah, Slovenia kind of has a whole other thing going on in the Slavic world. Let's find it on the globe now, shall we? So, in Europe, Slovenia is one of the lesser known nations that doesn't get as much relative spotlight on the international stage. They definitely know how to hold their ground as a country and function efficiently though, mostly. I mean, there may be a few demarcation controversies, which will be explained
What was
in the
that?
motion graphic.
What
For
is
one,
it?
Slovenia, which by the way...
What?
demarcation
Ew!
contro-
What is that? That is gross. Bro, what is that border? That is gross.
Controversies, which will be explained in the motion graphic. For one, Slovenia, which by the way looks like a screaming chicken, is located right at the crossroads of the Balkan Peninsula, South Europe, and Central Europe, bordered by four other countries,
Oh, I
Italy,
see
Austria,
now.
Hungary, and Croatia. In the west, they have a small 29-mile or 47-kilometer long coast with the Adriatic. It could have been longer if Italy hadn't totally swooped in and grabbed this town, Trieste, which Slovenia kind of claims used to be theirs a long time ago, but that's another story. This also creates a weird triangle-shaped maritime dispute with Croatia on the Gulf of Piran. The issue was actually brought to the International Court of Justice in The Hague. And today, based on the Drnovšek-Račan agreement, the boundaries look like this and give Slovenia a very small 16-kilometer long, 2.5 nautical mile wide corridor to the international waters known as the Junction Area. But that's not all. Along the border, Slovenia still claims the left bank of the St. Odoric Canal, built centuries ago, extending about 7 kilometers inland. This thin slice at the narrowest, only about 24 meters wide, has crop fields with a few buildings, and even a casino that is de facto run by Croatia. But Slovenia is like, come on, it's ours. In fact, much of the border confusion is just with Croatia, mostly along the historical river boundaries that shifted, so everything is a mess. You go to the end of the beak at the tri-point with Croatia and Hungary, you can clearly see the scrambled mess on the Mur and Big Kra rivers, with narrowly attached amorphous blobs of land. Head south and you find the Brezovica-Prometliki dispute, with arbitrarily drawn lines between them and Croatia, established around World War II. Anyway, the capital and largest city is Ljubljana, meaning the loved one, located in the central west part of the country. From there, the secondary subdivision of the country is, I kid you not, 212 municipalities, 11 of which are classified as urban municipalities, meaning they have over 20,000 people and are economic and cultural centers of their regions. To make things a little easier though, the country is also divided into 12 statistical regions for the purpose of data collecting. These regions though have no official administrative function in themselves. Ljubljana of course has the largest and busiest airport, Jože Pučnik International, where most people fly into when visiting. From there, only two other international airports exist, one in the second largest city, Maribor, which can be found about 100 kilometers northeast, and the third in Portorož, on the coast of the Adriatic, whose IATA code is POW! Speaking of the coast, the largest and busiest seaport is located at Koper, where the vast majority of cargo is transported. From there, an extensive network of roads connect every municipality, including the longest one, the A1 highway that starts on the coast and ends in Austria. And just like the highways, the country has a network of state-owned rail lines that more or less parallel the same roads and highways along them. Yeah, countries with borders on shifting riverbeds always end up in what I like to call the Balkan dilemma. Quick side note though, if you ask Slovenians how they might divide their country apart from, 212 municipalities, they might refer to the 7 traditions.
Okay, that's better. That's better than that fart show. See that difference? Boy, look at it, look at it, look at it, look at it. Yeah, that looks way better than this fart.
Additional regions. People still disagree on what actual boundaries are for these regions, but it kind of maybe more or less looks like this. And each of them have their own stereotypes or regional culture. If you are Slovenian, feel free to write down in the comments how you would describe each traditional region. I don't know, I heard like Primorska are like the talkative, temperamental people, and like Styria is like the happy, drunk, Austrian-influenced people. I don't know. What do you think? In any case, when you come and look at Slovenia, you'll notice that within this small country, there's like a profusion of fusion. Nowhere else in the world can you really get a country that mixes all three of the largest ethno-linguistic people groups of Europe, the Slavs, the Germanic, and the Latin. Which brings us to the notable places section. Some of the top notable sites of Slovenia might include Ljubljana Castle and the Dragon Bridge, the autonomous Metelkova Art Center, the prehistoric pile dwellings of Ljubljana Moor, the wine regions, especially in Vipavo, the Honey Cookie Museum, the Planica ski jump, the traditional herdsman huts of Velika Planina, and there are too many castles, 500 to 1,000 castles throughout the country, depending on what you consider a castle. There's even one in a cave, and there are over 2,500 historic churches. The most famous one, and the one you'll probably see on a lot of postcards, Lake Bled Island Church. It's the only natural island in the country, and tradition says that the groom has to carry the bride all the way up all 99 steps.
Well, I just had hip surgery, babe, so change of plans.
Oh my gosh.
And it's all surrounded by beautiful waters and mountains. And speaking of landscape, it's time to move on to...
Hey, you guys want to try the best duo in the world? Hidden Valley Ranch and Pizza.
You want to put ranch on pizza?
Yes!
This is
Ranch on pizza.
It's often said that Slovenia is the sunny side of the Alps. They have so much going on that even parts of the Chronicles of Narnia were filmed here. Lots of stuff to cover. So, here we go. First of all, the country is located right in the transition zone between the Alps and the Dinaric Alps that extend into the Balkan Peninsula. The country is predominantly hilly or mountainous, with about 90% of the surface resting on at least 200 meters above sea level. At nearly 62%, it is also the third most forested country by percentage of land area in Europe after Finland and Sweden. From there are three main subsections of the Alps in the northern part of Slovenia: the Pohorje, the Kamnik Savinja, and the largest ones, the Julian Alps. In the Julians, you can find the tallest mountain Triglav, known for its majestic triple peaks, as depicted on the coat of arms. And just below, nestled within these ridges, is the largest natural lake of the country, Bohinj. Just above this, you'll find the longest river. Just above all this, you'll find the longest river that flows through the country, the Sava, which flows southeast for about 615 miles, ending in Croatia. A branch of the Sava, the Ljubljanica, goes through the capital, and it's a very important river. From there, you have the smaller highlands like the Nanos and Dinaric Mountains in the southwest, the Sava and Slovene Hills in the center and east, which lead to the flattest part of the country, the Pannonian Basin in the far east.
It took this little tiny strip just to be cut. Wow, that's mean of them.
Country sitting not far from some major fault lines like the Dinaric Alps, the country has a few tectonic fissures like the Rasha and Divača fault lines. These fault lines are partially responsible for making the entire western part of Slovenia a karst zone. The word even originated from Slovenia, meaning a landscape underlain by eroded and dissolved limestone, creating landforms like ridges, towers, sinkholes, and caves. In fact, there are over 10,000 registered caves, and many new ones are discovered annually. The longest known system in the country being the Migovets in the northwest, also part of the Triglav National Park, with about 42,000 meters of tunnel explored. The second longest one, though, Postojna, is way more popular and commercialized, as it was the first cave system to have electric lighting in the world in 1884, and even a train system built for tourists back in 1872. Yeah, no joke, whether it's the green surface of the Logarska Dolina Glacial Valley or the green underground river labyrinth.
Whoa. Look at that for a second. I'm just checking something.
Prince of Postojna. Slovenia's landscape is absolutely speckled with picturesque sights. I'm more of a Blejski Vinkar type of guy, but yeah, sure. Oh, and forgot to mention, all these fault lines are also factors that create the copious amounts of thermal springs in the south and eastern parts of the country, the largest ones being the Čatež thermal spa near Croatia. I think I got that, I don't know. So you get the mountain experience, the alpine experience, the cave experience, and even a few coastal beaches and thermal spas. Woohoo! It's like a quintuple package deal. Granted, they do have a lot of overcast skies and rainy days year-round, but that's besides the point. Pretty good deal. And speaking of good deals, usually Noah comes in to finish off this segment, but he's visiting family during the season. So let's see, as a Slavic nation, why don't we have our favorite resident Slav, Ivan, come in to fill in for this time.
Zdravo. I'm here, baby. How you doing? I actually didn't even leave, to be honest. I'm ready. If you look at the way Slovenia operates, they have quite a success story when it comes to managing the relationship between environment and economy. In fact, the EU anointed Slovenia's capital as the greenest capital in Europe after achieving 96 out of 100 detailed sustainability indicators. Wow. They have become one of the fastest developing nations in Europe and enjoy a high level of prosperity and stability in contrast to other countries. Even though they only made about 11% of the population of Yugoslavia, they accounted for about a fifth of the GDP and a third of the exports. I mean, right? So when they wanted the independence, it was like, are you sure you want to go out on your own? I mean, it's a scary world out there.
Yeah, Dad, I think I got it covered.
Slovenia has been a mini powerhouse in electronics and equipment production. Some domestic brands like these produce everything from light aircrafts to motorcycle exhaust pipes and refrigerators. In fact, Slovenia supposedly has the most tractors per capita in the world. Weird fact, the fact nonetheless. In addition, they are huge on wine. It is said that there is a vineyard for every...
Of course they're huge on wine. They're literally right by the Italians, and they don't want to be like, what the... They're slobs.
70 people in the country, and they have the world's oldest vine still producing fruit at around 440 years old. And keep in mind that one vine survived centuries of wars, battles, bombings, and a lot of blowing shit up. Someone give that vine a Medal of Honor or something. I don't know. Just
give it a Medal of Honor. Okay, that... You know what? That vine does need a Medal of Honor. It needs every medal.
Keep going. Anyways, one other national pastime, beekeeping. That's right. Specifically with the native Carniolan honeybee. It is said there is about one beekeeper per 200 people in the country. Honey shops selling honey all over the place, and honey-flavored foods are everywhere in Slovenia. Honey, honey, honey is their thing. Don't try and take it. And speaking of bees and insects, here's Gary Harlow.
Gary Harlow here. As a heavily forested country, it's no
Bro, he sounds so Australian.
surprise that Slovenia has incredible biodiversity. There's over 15...
This sounds so fake. This sounds like... It does sound like a Morgus video.
1,000 animal species, 6,000 plants, and 5,000 fungi. One of which is currently on my foot. And about...
Okay, this
10% of Slovenia is protected national park, the largest one being the Triglav National Park in the northwest part of the country. You can find some of the 75 mammal species here, like European beavers, grey wolves, and European otters.
Do an otter sound.
Otter!
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Otter. Sounds like otters. Okay. Slovenia actually has one of the highest concentration of brown bears per capita in the world. And one of the most famous horse breeds, the Lipizan, is from here. Originated from the oldest European stud farm. Because it's studs. And of course, every Slovenian will tell you to try and find a baby dragon. At least that's what the locals call orms. Blind aquatic salamanders that thrive in the dark, wet cave systems. That's it for me.
And it's time for... That got dark fast. Okay. Gary Harlow after hours.
Thank you, Gary. All right, and with that, it's time to finish off the segment as we always do. Now, guys, Slovenia has a lot to offer culinary-wise, as they kind of fuse everything from South, Central, and Balkan Europe. Some dishes may include things like meatloaf with hard-boiled egg, scrambled egg soup, and Yoda. I know, it sounds like, come here, Yoda, but it's not. Yota. What? It's Yota. Yoda. I know, it sounds like meatloaf with hard-boiled egg, scrambled egg soup, and Yoda.
Yoda. It is Yoda. It's Yota. Wait, that sounds like Yoda.
I know, it sounds like, come here, Yoda, but it's not. Yota.
Yoda. Yoda.
Yota. It's Yota. Pucha, repa, carniol and sausage, custard cake,
sausage,
layered strudel cake, and potica.
Sausage.
A lot of potica. For drinks, they also boast thousands of microbreweries, especially in Kamni. They even have a beer fountain in Žalik. Beer fountain, guys. You hear me? Nonetheless, the national drink is schnapps. Many people even make their own at home, probably in a tub. Who knows? And speaking of a home life, that brings us to the people of Slovenia, which we will discuss in...
Hey, Cover Girls. Remember that? I was a Cover Girl in 1998, and today I'm the Cover...
Thank you, Ivan. Now, in the words of Geography Irina, Slovenia is a Slavic country with its head in Austria and feet in Italy. Years of being subjugated under the Romans, Austro-Hungarians, and the Yugoslavs has shaped and molded this interesting anomaly of a nation that kind of bridges the Slavic, Germanic, and Latin cultures all in one. And it's funny because, like, they're not the only one of these culturally divergent oddity countries. Like, they're all over Europe.
Most Latins are Catholic, but I'm kind of feeling this Orthodox thing.
And I swear I'm Nordic.
So yeah, Slovenia is not alone. Anyway, here's the graph. Population-wise, Slovenia has a little over 2 million people, and they have the highest GDP nominal and purchasing power parity in the entire Balkan region. The country is predominantly ethnically Slovene at about 83%, and from there the rest are from a slew of other countries, none super prevalent, but the largest one being Serbs and Croats at about 2% each, and the rest of the population come from mostly other parts of Europe like Bosnia and Herzegovina, there's Romani people and Hungarians, and so on. They use the euro as their currency, they use the types C and F plug outlets, and they drive on the right side of the road. Now, Slovenia's national language is, no shocker, Slovene. It's a Slavic language related to their Balkan cousins like Serbian or Croatian, but it's like way less intelligible and has a lot of weird German twists. In fact, Slovene grammar is way more confusing because not only do they have the singular and plural tenses, but they also have a dual tense to describe pairs of nouns. Here's Geography Kaya explaining.
Well, the formal Slovenian language is a unique language because it's truly romantic. It uses the dual grammatical number in addition to the singular and the plural. For example, in English language you would say dog to one dog and dogs to two dogs or more. And now in Slovene, pes means one dog, psa means two dogs, and psi means three or more dogs. I will also give an example of verb delati, which means working, conjugation. Delam means I am working, delava means we are working, and delamo means we are working, and so on. It is used for verbs as well as nouns, pronouns, adjectives, except in some dialects. Sometimes it is very confusing even for us Slovenes. I can't imagine how hard it must be for someone who tries to learn it.
Thank you, Kaya. Nonetheless, as a small country with a rare language, the vast majority of people in Slovenia are either bilingual or trilingual, with English and German as common second and third languages. The country, in fact, ranked at one time having the 4th best education system in Europe and 12th in the world. Faith-wise, like their Croatian neighbors, Slovenia is a Catholic-influenced nation. Somewhere around 70% of the country claims to be at least some way affiliated with the church. So yeah, as you can see, Slovenia is quite a cultural anomaly. Nature-loving, Germanified, Catholic-y Slavs. And with so much of the great outdoors surrounding them, they've always been kind of keen on going outside and staying active. Skiing is probably their favorite pastime. In fact, many children learn how to ski in primary school. No athlete is more renowned, though, than gold medalist Tina Matze, who won the women's downhill and
Boys, don't get the bone.
giant slalom events in the Sochi Olympics in 2014. Basketball and handball are popular too.
Basketball!
They won the Eurobasket gold medal in 2017. And 3rd place in the World Handball Championships.
Handball? That's football. That's American football, basically.
In the very same year. Oh shoot, I'm talking about sports. Sorry, Art, I took a little bit of your segment. Anyway, here's Art finishing off the sports part with Art.
Wait, Slovenia and Slovakia are 2 different places?
Oh my god.
Proof gingers have souls. Ish.
Sure.
Bicycling has also a long-standing tradition in Slovenia, as they have countless paths and roads that are perfect for training. They've actually won 2 Grand Tours. This guy, who was the first Slovene to win a Grand Tour in 2019. And this guy, who won the Tour in France in 2000. God, it's the Tour de France. The Tour de France in 2020. I can't even believe it was going on with this whole pandemic and all that.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, they had one, I guess.
Well, congrats to you, Taj Pokadar. In the end, though, one sport that is definitely in their element would be mountaineering. That's not a sport, but whatever. Slovenia is considered a mountaineering powerhouse, and anything that has to do with climbing, tackling a mountain, you can bet a Slovene like these guys will not be far from the elite pack. And speaking of climbing, I need to climb my way out of here, so I'm like...
That's going down, climbing is up. There's...
Okay. Oh,
Torchin. Thank you, Art. You so crazy. Slovenians, they've always kind of been like a country that tries to like highlight every little claim they can. They'll even tell you they invented the wheel because the oldest known wheel ever found was in a swamp near the capital. And speaking of claims, Slovenia has a lot of vibrant, colorful tradition. And with that, here's Random Hannah's turn to take a swing at the batter's box.
Guys, it is so good to be back. I have nothing to whine about, and neither do you now, because we have a random Hannah shirt! Whoop, whoop, whoop. And you can get it at geographynow.com. So Slovenia. Underneath those industrious mountain folk is a people riddled and vivacious backstory. It is said that in order to be a true Slovene, you must climb the highest peak, Triglav, followed by a custom of, well, goes like this.
Wow, we made it to the top of Mount Triglav. This is great, isn't it?
Yeah, it's beautiful, man.
They don't find
That's the tradition. Many people may live with their extended family, and Sunday family lunches are very common. When a child is born, there is usually a 3-day-long party that includes a lot of wine drinking and soaking the father in wine because it is supposed to stop the baby from having flat feet. Wait, what? I was like, flat feet? Slovenes are proud of their contribution to modern inventions, such as dialysis machines, Hewlett-Packard calculators, the photograph, slide frame, the foldable wooden rec chair, and spherical liquid crystal lasers. I had a problem saying everything except for spherical liquid crystal lasers. The national costume, known as the Narodna Nosha, might be worn at special events. You might notice the slight Germanic undertones for the male costumes, with leather knee-high boots over breeches, felt hats, and finally, a scarf under the vest. For women, you have the more Slavic-looking blouses and petticoats, the most notable part of the costume being the headdress or abva, often with an embroidered headband followed by a poofy white starched bow on the back. The bigger, poofier abvas are usually reserved for married women. Literature has always persisted in Slovene culture, with their most famed poet Francis Pescherin, and these authors and playwrights who pioneered movements like Slovene modernism, avant-gardism, and expressionism. Metropolitan architecture in Slovenia has a unique twist that mixes everything from Vienna secessionist cream-colored neo-Baroque exteriors to royalist Yugoslav and functionalist Yugoslav complexes. Paul! Someone write a letter to Paul and tell him to write his sentences better.
I'm the king of run-on sentences.
I don't even know what I just said. Speaking of construction, Slovenia is one of the few places you can see Klopotek. Tell me if I pronounced that right, guys. Don't let the image fool you. This is not a windmill, but more of a scarecrow that keeps birds away from vineyards with spinning and rattling sounds. Of course, Slovenes love celebration. They have the Lent Festival, the Novi Rock Festival, the Slovene Book Fair. They even have one of Europe's most renowned carnival festivals, lasting 11 days in the town of Patui, and is inscribed in the UNESCO Heritage List. They celebrate Pusht, which is like a Halloween in February, where the character is sentenced to death for causing all the world's problems. That's dramatic. And speaking of all the world's problems, here is Keith with the music segment. Buy my shirt, not Keith's shirt.
You're all here to get educated again. Music of Slovenia. For one, they have one of the world's oldest known instruments, the Neanderthal flute. Made by Barebone, discovered in 1995, thought to be about 50,000 years old. Today, they moved on to more refined elements. Traditionally, Slovenian music has been heavily influenced by the Germans, Swiss, and Austrians. Yeah. They are one of the few Slavic peoples that really love to play the accordion, specifically the Styrian, the oldest kind in the world according to Austria, which, you know, those Austrians, if they're anything like the Germans, they're, you know, smart. All right. Good save. They even have their own styles of polka and waltz. During Italian influence years, many Slovene Renaissance composers like these dudes came into the spotlight. During the Austro-Hungarian Empire years, things got way more Germanified. During the Romantic period, composers like these rose to the top. Nonetheless, they still respect their traditional Slovenian roots and have their own Slovene folk styles. Slavko Avsenik being probably the most famous musician of Slovenian folk music. He is known for inventing the Oberkrainer country sound that became popular in Slovenia, Germany, Austria. Today, Slovenians indulge in every genre imaginable, just like every country at this point on the face of the earth. There was a huge industrial rock movement in the 1980s, in the 90s with Laibach, and the a cappella band Perpetuum Jazil. The best band, though, that came, at least be partially claimed by Slovenia, would be Two Cellos, which I believe is Paul's favorite band.
Yeah, Luca, love you, man. You're from Slovenia. I had to put this in the episode. Two Cellos. I love that band.
He loves them. Anyway, I'm Keith. I'm awesome. Buy a Keith shirt. You know, you get to look like this sexy dude. Anyways, love you guys. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Keith. And with that, let's just do a very quick rundown on the history of Slovenia. In the quickest way I can summarize it, in the late 6th and 7th century, they had their first kingdom. Then Charlemagne kind of took over. Then for like 1400 years, they were part of different German-speaking kingdoms. World War I, they had a short-lived state called the State of Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs. Then the Kingdom of Serbs and Croats and Slovenes. World War II, Yugoslavia. 1991, independence. Joins the EU and NATO. Joins the European Monetary Union. And those are like the biggest things. I asked you guys, the Slovene geography peeps, to give me a list of all the famous Slovene people you could think of. Here are some of the people you mentioned. There are just so many of them. I'm just going to put the list on with a montage. Feel free to screenshot this if you want and look these people up. Tarchin, do you want to be a famous Slovene? Do you? Look at me exploiting animals. Ha! Definitely not below me. And speaking of, I don't know, there's no way to really transition from a dog to friend zone, but anyway, here's friend zone. Man's best friend. Oh, how could I miss that? Dog. Man's best friend. Oh. Anyway, as we mentioned many times, Slovenia is kind of like the bridge between the Germanic, Latin, and Slavic peoples. So you'll see those countries generally kind of tie into the mix when it comes to their friends. For one, with Italy, it's kind of like a love, little bit of hate relationship. Historically, they were part of many Italian-based kingdoms and empires and rulers, like the Romans, Byzantines, and the Republic of Venice. And today, they still kind of look at the map and say, really? Trieste? Come on, Italy. Nonetheless, there are many Italian and Slovene minorities in each other's countries, and they have amicable relations. When it comes to their Balkan neighbors, Slovenia is basically the uncle that begrudgingly shows up to the South Slavic family reunion only because they are family, and no matter how different you are, you never disavow your family. Out of all the South Slavs, Serbians are the largest minority in Slovenia at about 2 to 3% of the population, and many have family within each other's countries. There was a little drama when they recognized Kosovo and the rest of the NATO allies back in the day, which created a small sour taste in Serbia's mouth, but nonetheless, they remain close. Croatia has always been a close friend, and Slovenes almost always take a mass migration to their coast for a vacation annually. Of course, there's always a little bit of drama with Croatia as well, considering the unfinished border disputes, and some Slovenians will bring up the historical claims of land that are now in Croatia that they claim were part of Slovenia in the past, but these issues are not detrimental to the overall bilateral diplomacy between these two countries. As a nation that's always kind of been at the crossroads between the three main parts of Europe, joining the Latin world with the Germanic and Slavic, it's no shocker that Slovenia also kind of acts like the nice neutral mediator for larger states. Whenever the EU wants to get involved in anything non-EU Europe country related, Slovenia is usually a good nomination for summit meetings, and not even just between the EU. Back in 2008, they even hosted a meeting between former US President Bush and Vladimir Putin. When it comes to their best friends, however, almost every Slovene I have talked to has in some way, shape, or form mentioned the same country, Austria. It is often said that Slovenes are like Slavic Austrians. They do their best to emulate the Austrian lifestyle. The influence is clearly evident in their social structure, everything from the accordion playing to the alpine mountaineering culture.
Let's check something. I'm gonna open OBS quick. We don't want to get rid of that before. Move. There.
Slovenes are totally crushing on Austrians. Austria acknowledges them and enjoys their company, but usually pays more attention to Switzerland and Germany, which in return only makes Slovenia crazier for their crush, and they do everything from learning German to dancing the waltz just to get their attention. It's cute. In conclusion, just like Triglav with its triple peaks, Slovenia is kind of like a triple bridge nation that connects the Germanic, Latin, and Slavic worlds, which is why, no shocker, so many people must be in Slav with Slovenia.
Not good.
Nobody's here to punch me. Oh, they're much better. Anyway, stay tuned. The Solomon Islands is coming up next.
That was epic. What do we do? Let's just see what this is.
So all of this looks really cool, Old Town Square. But the interesting thing is, it was all bombed in World War II and reconstructed. So everything here looks old, but it's really younger than the USA. So all of this looks really cool. Old Town Square. But the interesting thing is,
We'll do Syria. They don't sponsor me. Don't use them. They don't sponsor me.
For all the sneezes and Super Dad snack times, choose Kleenex Ultra Soft Tissues, made for extra comfort, 3 layers strong. Kleenex, for all the moments.
all right, we are back to the Levant, or Bilad al-Sham. In the Arab world family, Syria is kind of like the old man reading a book, but then he lifts his sleeves, revealing scars and tattoos that tell stories of every chapter of his life. He's a complicated man with a story way too difficult to summarize. But for what it's worth, I'll try to get as much palpable information shoved into whatever amount of time we have. I'll do my best and take my job seriously.
It's time to learn geography.
No. Hey everybody, I'm your host Barbs. Get a Geography Now mug or Geography Now merch at geographynow.com. It's not selling out if it's your brand. So I actually did entertain the thought of possibly visiting Syria for this episode. So I asked you guys, the Syrian geography.
Syria. Very interesting place. It's desert. Who would want to live in a desert? Weird people.
If there was any way I could. More or less, most of you kind of responded like this.
We would love it if you could come, and things are getting better, but now may not be the best time.
Even if I fly into Lebanon and maybe take a bus across...
No. We love that you really want to come, but we would totally get it if, you wanted to sit this one out.
So I took your advice and decided to...
Yeah, this civil war going on right now, it's coming to an end, I think. Which is good news. The Russian government is winning, which is bad. Because they rig elections and they do bad stuff. Anyway.
Hold off on a Syria trip. Nonetheless, you know what that means. If I can't go, then I have to bring Syria here. Any of you guys, the Syrian geography peeps, will be featured in this video. You guys submitted your own videos. Super excited for you guys to meet them. It's gonna be awesome. Quite a lot of stuff going on. Let's begin. So before we dive into the map, you have to understand some backstory when it comes to Syria. See, the shape and borders that you see here right now are technically what Syria looks like today. However, these borders were only shaped in the 20th century. Prior to that, the areas that Syria has today were subject to a myriad of empires, kingdoms, sultanates, protectorates, and state statuses. It would take way too long to cover, but throughout thousands of years, Syria went through the Neolithic period, the Ebla Kingdom, Mesopotamia years, old Assyrian empires, then the Hittites, Canaanites, Phoenicians, Neo-Assyrians, and Neo-Babylonians, Achaemenids, Persians, Greeks, even the Armenians got in for a little bit. Then the Romans, the Byzantines, the Arab Rashiduns conquered, bringing in Islam, the Umayyads, Abbasids, Mongols even took a quick stab at it for some reason. Then the Ottoman Turks took over for like 400 years, and the French were the last ones to hold on to it until they got independence in the 40s. But then they joined Egypt as one super Arab nation, but then they were like, not feeling it, peace out Egypt, but we're keeping the flag. Then the Al-Assad family takes over the country since 1971, and here we are today with the current state we have. And that's not even scratching the surface. First, let's take a look at the globe, shallst we. First of all, Syria lies in the Middle East, bordered by 5 other countries. This general area east of the Mediterranean that Syria lies in is historically known as the Levant, making Syria a Levantine country. Syria's boundaries today are essentially the byproduct of post-Ottoman era delineation lines created by the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, allocating the boundaries of modern-day Syria to France, the last country to hold the area under mandate status. Since independence, the northern and southern borders have had some conflict in regards to territorial disputes. In the north of Syria, along with the border of Turkey, these areas are sometimes called Western Kurdistan or Rojava, and they are heavily administered by the Kurdish community that has some level of self-proclaimed autonomy from the rest of Syria. Otherwise, at the tri-point with Lebanon and Israel, they have the Golan Heights dispute. This entire valley has been in conflict since 1964, as there are no formal treaties or documents describing the exact boundary, and both sides claim it. Today, Israel occupies most of the Golan Heights, and up to the UN Disengagement Observer Force, or UND, DOF Alpha Line, and from there the UN's patrolling force stands guard in the buffer zone all the way up to the UN DOF Line Bravo. Within this buffer zone, Syria occupies small towns and even the peak of Mount Hermon, the tallest mountain in the region. There's a lot more that goes into this, but that's the general layout. The capital city is Damascus, known as the City of Jasmine, widely considered the oldest continuously inhabited city on Earth. Here, of course, you can also find the largest and busiest airport, Damascus International. Nonetheless, the largest city is actually Aleppo, a little bit further up north, followed by Homs at number 3, just between them and Damascus. The largest shipping port of the country, though, is actually the port of Latakia, which has been in continuous use since 2000 BC. Speaking of coasts, Syria only has about 5 main small islands in the Mediterranean, the largest being Arwad, just off the coast of Tartus, known for its ancient citadel. The country is divided into 14 governorates. However, the governorate of Quneitra, pretty sure I mispronounced that, sorry, is essentially the disputed Golan Heights area. All the administration is located east of the DOF Bravo line, but some of the towns are located within the buffer zone, some literally on the Alpha buffer line. Finally, the majority of the population lives in an upside-down crescent shape that hugs the borders with Lebanon and Turkey and flows down the Euphrates River. This means that most of the population can be reached via the 2 main highways, the M5 and M4. Syria also has an extensive rail network, both cargo and passenger, that more or less falls within the same pattern of population distribution as well.
Now keep in mind, as of upload for this video in 2021, due to recent ongoing conflicts, many of the rail lines have either halted or changed operation schedules, and of course, based on whatever the social climate is of that day, driving between cities, you may or may not have to pass through security checkpoints. The rules are always kind of changing, and there doesn't seem to be a set system in place. In addition, Syria is incredibly rich with distinct ancient sites, unlike anywhere on Earth, let alone 6 UNESCO heritage sites. It's kind of unfortunate though, because the aftermath of current conflicts have decreased tourism somewhere around 75%. Nonetheless, the country is still moving forward to some degree, and if you are lucky enough to find yourself in Syria on a good day, you should consider checking out some of the top notable places. Let's give it to one of you guys, the Syrian geography peeps, to explain. This time, I believe it is Gaida, the guide. She's literally a tour guide in Syria.
This is Gaida. I'm a tour guide in Syria. Let's start with my city, Damascus, the Umayyad Mosque. It's one of the oldest places dedicated for worship. Next would be definitely Palmyra, the beautiful oasis in the Syrian desert. With its beautiful monuments, people worship 61 different gods there, and they all live peacefully and in harmony. Now that's remarkable. Busra is also a special place to my heart. It's breathtaking. Also, one of my favorite places to visit is Malula. It's literally carved into the mountains. Amrit, the Phoenician city with the oldest Olympic stadium in the world. Also, Crac de Chevalier, the village of Saydnaya, the coastal area, and of course, Aleppo and Hama. What I want to conclude with is that Syria is an underrated country, and I can guarantee you'll learn a lot and enjoy every minute of it. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you, Gaida. Check out her Instagram and hit her up if you ever want to go to Syria. Yeah, it's quite impressive how much Syria holds a link to the past and tries its best to maintain it. And one other thing that gives them structure is the land they live upon. Which brings us to...
There's really nothing to talk about.
Make every exam your moment with Chegg.
They don't sponsor me, so don't use it.
Okay, so when most people think of Syria and what it looks like, they tend to just kind of default to what they've seen in the news, you know, conflict in dry, dusty deserts, beige and yellow stones. Yeah, that perspective needs an upgrade. Let's check it out on the globe one more time. Motion graphic, go!
Syria lies right on the northwestern edge of the Arabian Plate, split on the Dead Sea fault line. This is basically what causes the entire mountainous western region of Syria. In the north, you have the Bargilus or Nusaria Mountains, which is, of course, as you can see, the most fertile, green, and lush part of the country.
That's cool. Yeah, that's... I would not want to live in Syria. There's like no greens, which is sad. Because it's all desert. Desert. Diarrhea.
Country. To the south, you have the anti-Lebanon mountains, where, as we already explained, you can find the highest peak, Mount Hermon. Inland from the fault line, you have the Palmyra Fold Belt, a byproduct of the Dead Sea fault line, which creates 2 small hill chains, the Rujmain and Ruwaq ranges. They fade downwards into the vast, sparsely inhabited Syrian desert. To the very south, you find the As-Safa and Jabal ad-Druz volcanic fields. The land is made up of dark basaltic lava fields with about 40 mostly Holocene or extinct cinder cones. The longest river of the country is, of course, the mighty Euphrates River that originates in Turkey, fed by two other major rivers flowing southward, the Balikh and Khabur. Within the flow path of the Euphrates, you find the largest inland body of water, Lake Assad, which is actually a reservoir created by the Tapka Dam in the south side. These waterways are essentially the lifeblood of the entire eastern side of the country and have been for civilizations for millennia. Finally, Syria is made up of 4 distinct ecoregions. You have the eastern Mediterranean broadleaf forest zone, which is
Okay, they have actually good amount of green there then. Now, I would want to live in that area.
concentrated mostly on the coastal mountains.
If I ever had the choice to move to Syria.
By the sea. Then you have the xeric grass and shrublands in the middle inland section of the country. Just south of that, you have the Mesopotamian shrub desert, the driest and most sparsely populated part of the country. And finally, in very small sections, you can actually find southern Anatolian deciduous forest zones locked in sections of the western mountain ranges. The trees here actually look different from the Mediterranean broadleaf zone. So yeah.
So, as you can see from that motion graphic, there's quite a bit going on with Syria's natural side. Volcanoes, who would have thought? In any case, with much land to work with, Syria is also a place known for its industry and fiscal output. That means it's time for my triple shot of espresso break, which means Noah!
On scene and ready. Let's roll. Now, economically speaking, in addition to the effects of conflict, sanctions against Assad's government from numerous nations and IGOs like the Arab League, the EU, and the US played into their collapse. Most major enterprises in Syria are nationalized, but in 2001, private banking was made legal, and in 2004, they formed their own small domestic market. So in a way, they are kind of attempting to switch things up and experiment with new finance methods, which are slowly kind of working. One thing that helps, of course, thanks to their diverse landscape, is a relatively abundant resource reservoir. Now, most outsiders might assume Syria is a major petroleum producer, and although they do have a hydrocarbon belt, mostly in the deserts in northeast, and it does account for about a quarter of their state's revenue and has been their major export since 1974, nonetheless, on a global scale, they aren't really a major powerhouse producer in terms of volume, not even in the top 50.
But you know we are still keeping our eyes on them.
Of course you are. Syrians actually export more olive oil than crude oil. It is their prized resource, and they don't just use it for food. One thing you will definitely hear every Syrian praising: Aleppo soap made with olive oil. This stuff dates back thousands of years, and the technique is still used today.
You guys have sent me this stuff on Fan Friday. I love it. It usually comes in boxes that look like this. Soap looks like this. It has a very raw...
It definitely looks old, since people have lived in this Middle East since Age of Civilization, start of it.
Earthy smell, and when you use it, it feels like you just took a shower with history. Buy it.
Fun fact, Damascus was also known for producing some of the most prized steel in antiquity with a special technique that is all but lost today. Many have tried to replicate it, but none have had much success. Well, there's more than just resources in this country. Believe it or not, there's even flora and fauna to discuss. And who better to discuss it than Gary Harlow?
Right, Gary Harlow here. Syria's ecosystem is pretty much divided east and west. Currently, the country has 2 nature reserves, 2 state forests, and over 30 protected areas. Within these reserves, you might find some of the most distinct species you've ever heard of. Mountain gazelles, Angora goats, the steppe eagle, and on the coast, you can find the angel shark and the Mediterranean monk seals. The Levant viper and black desert cobras call their rocky hills their homes. They pay rent there and everything, as does the deathstalker scorpion, one of the most dangerous species of scorpion in the world. I've eaten 3 of them. The national animal
Sounds like a Morgs video.
It's actually the rare and endangered Syrian brown bear, whereas the national bird is the northern bald ibis. In fact, due to recent conflicts, many of the wildlife have suffered and had either permanently migrated to other less affected areas or been dramatically reduced, and one of which being the now extinct Syrian elephant. Syria used to have elephants. One animal they definitely have not reduced, though, would be the famous fat-tailed sheep. It's said that top-notch...
What? Bro, that is the fattest tail I've ever seen.
baklava is made from the fat of the tail of these sheep.
Speaking of interesting parts of animals, remember that time we ate camel hump in Somaliland?
And that's all for me. Whoever wears this hat is Gary Harlow. Now Paul is Gary Harlow.
Thank you, Gary. Yes, Syria definitely knows how to do food. They aren't called the Fertile Crescent for nothing. To expound a little bit more on the food of Syria, we have these two geography peeps to explain.
Marhaba, my name is Angham. I come from a small town called Banyas in Syria. And today we're gonna go over some of the top foods in Syria. The Syrian cuisine is a part of the Eastern Mediterranean cuisine. Magdous is a...
Yep, that... Okay, she knows... Yeah, I mean, that's a good setup. That's... You know they're a cook. But they got that onion, and that lemon, and that onion, and the potato.
Usually breakfast food. It's a cured eggplant stuffed with red peppers, walnuts, and dipped in olive oil. We have also ورق عنب, محاشي مقلوبة, كوسة بلبن, شيخ المحشي, more common in Damascus, cherry kebab, which is so popular among the Armenian population in Aleppo, sweets, حلاوة بجبن, هريسة, معروكة.
A popular snack or comfort food that we have is eating rice with yogurt. So I have like my cooked rice here, some fresh yogurt, and then I put a bit of allspice or 7 spices. This is a very popular seasoning that we use. So this is what it looks like. You basically just eat rice and yogurt as a snack. At least that's what Syrians do, and it's phenomenal. It's literally like my comfort food.
Thanks, geography peeps. Well, that's all I got in this segment. Cheers to you all, and Barbs, back to you.
Thank you, Noah. Also, yes, Syrians are obsessed with yerba mate. They are one of the top importers from South American countries, especially Argentina. Fun fact, if it's cold, it's called terere. Watch the Paraguay episode. Also, they are one of the top producers of arak, their centuries-old tradition aniseed liquor. Invented by Arab Muslims in the 12th century.
Isn't that like haram?
Yeah, it technically is. I'll leave that up to you guys that are more knowledgeable in Islamic doctrine. Anyway, that brings us to the actual people of Syria, the Syrians. So let's discuss them in the next part.
Choose your gift now. Introducing Buck, the gamer's loyal.
Don't use this. Don't use. It's a scam. Probably. It's definitely a scam. It's a scam. Don't use this. Don't use buff.games.com. It's dumb.
Just curious. So, I asked you guys what it means to be Syrian. Here are some things you guys, the Syrian geography peeps, said.
As Syrian, I feel very proud to be part of the historical cycle of the earth. I feel very sad and upset when the word of Syria been mentioned only for war subjects. Actually, Syrian history is very massive.
All Syrians again look different, and this can change depending on what region of Syria you're from. So that's something that I also find really interesting. A lot of people think I'm French just because of the way I look, my complexion, my blue eyes, my curly brown hair. Again, Syria is one of the oldest civilizations, and it still preserves that culture regardless of that European, descent or change.
I'm very proud being a Syrian citizen because Syria is the cradle of civilization, the Fertile Crescent, The oldest civilizations in the world, in the recorded history, have thrived on the Syrian soil. Syria has also helped other nations. For example, in 2006, the Lebanese refugee crisis. We also hosted the Iraqi refugees. So Syria is I would say she's the carrion mother of the Arab world.
If you ever decided to visit, you'll end up meeting the most genuine and hospitable people, and you'll be having an amazing experience.
Thank you. Syria is a complex country of peoples. They are shaped by all eras of civilization that have passed through for the past 10 or so millennia. But first, let's break it down. Motion graphic time. First of all, the country has about 18.5 million people. However, pre-war, their population was around 23 million. About 10 million have been internally displaced, and over 5 million have fled since 2011. The country is made up primarily of Syrian Arabs, or Levantine Arabs, at about 74%. The second largest group are Kurds at about 9 to 10%. From here, things get a little confusing. It's often said that Turkmen Syrians are the third largest group, but there aren't any real reliable estimates on their exact numbers. In any case, after that, about 4% of the population are Assyrian, 1.5% Circassian, 1% Armenian, and the rest are a slew of various other minority groups like Albanians, Georgians, Greeks, Persians, Pashtuns, Russians, and Bosnians. They use the Syrian pound as their currency, they use the type C, E, and L plug outlets, and they drive on the right side of the road. Now back to the identity thing. What exactly is the term Levantine or Levantine Arab? This was actually a question that I asked a lot of you guys, the Syrian geography peeps, and more or less this is the answers that you guys kind of gave me. It's not very easy to explain, but in the most condensed way to put it, it's not originally Arab. Of course, over the centuries, numerous empires and communities came in and intermixed, so most of the population will probably have a genetic admixture paralleling these groups. But what it boils down to is that Levantines are more of an indigenous Mediterranean people group, and some will say that their lineage goes as far back to the ancient Canaanites. In any case, besides that, Syria's population is kind of broken down into two categories.
I've heard about Canaanites, I've read the Bible. Anyway, sorry guys. I'm just watching all my streamers. One of my favorites. Okay, let's continue.
Ethnic and religious. And you know what? I've actually been talking a long time. Let's have someone else fill in. Ian, here, why don't you have a segment? The people actually kind of like you.
Oh.
Here we go.
Now, we don't have time to get into deep detail for each group. There are so many, but some to highlight were already mentioned in the graph. You have the largest group, the Kurds, sometimes called Rojava Kurds. They mostly live in the north part of the country.
I made a video on it. If you want to check it out, we explained the Kurds.
The Turkmen Syrians date back to the Seljuk Empire, a Turco-Persian empire, and many more came during Ottoman times as well. The Armenians have a long history of inhabiting Syria. The largest migration came during the Ottoman times when there was a lot of conflict that drove them out. You have the Cypriot-originated Greeks, mostly found in the coastal areas, nice, some of whom are actually Muslim, which is pretty rare for Greeks. Don't get an Arab Syrian confused with an Assyrian. They have their own language, their own alphabet, their own flag. Most of them straddle lands across Syria and Iraq and are predominantly Christian.
Thank you, Ian. Good job.
Ow.
For the religion part, of course, Sunni Islam and Sunni-based schools of teaching are the predominant faith, whereas another 10 or so % are mostly Shia and Shia-based sects like Alawis or Nusayris. Most of them are concentrated on the Mediterranean coast, and interestingly enough, it is the sect of the ruling Assad family that they are tied with. Another 10% is mostly Christian and Christian-based sects like Maronites, Arameans, Orthodox, Apostolic. They even have the oldest church in the world. From there, about 3...
I thought it would be more Christian. I guess not. Less. No, I don't know. I thought it was gonna be more. Well, I guess not. Hold on, guys, I gotta do something. Just doing something quick. Alright, sorry guys. Sorry guys, okay.
3% are Druze, most of whom have large communities in the south of the country, and the rest are a group of other non-related faith communities like Romani, Mandeans, Yarsanis, and Yazidis. Some like Romani are North Indian based, and some like Yazidi are Iranic Zoroastrian based. Historically, there even used to be a large Sephardic Jewish community. They actually migrated after the expulsion from Spain in the 15th century. Basically, Syria allows religious freedom, however, by constitutional law, the president must always be Muslim. So anyway, language-wise, Arabic is the official language.
No, you don't say.
Yep, it is. But of course, they speak with a Levantine accent. Here are some of you guys explaining the Levantine.
I would see them with a Levantine accent. I know Syrian. I did know Syrian. Syrian has the most Levantine accent ever.
Levantine accent. Go for it.
It's called the Levantine Arabic or Shami Arabic. We do not pronounce the letters th, the, and qa. For example, the word qamar means moon. We pronounce it as Omar, we're talking about a country that is smaller than Colorado in area, and still I can count 25 or even more local dialects. So it's really not enough to talk about them in a short video, but I hope this helps.
In Syrian accent, it's very tough. Like, for example, the it's like very light. In Egyptian way, sham, but in Syrian one, al-sham. It's very tough, very strong.
And so in Levantine Arabic, there's a lot of French-esque words. With eggplant, we say aubergine. In Levantine Arabic, we say saboun, and in French, it's savon.
Thank you. Throughout the country, though, you'll find small communal language isolates, mostly Semitic-based. For example, the town of Malula, they still speak Aramaic, the language that was spoken by Jesus. Moving on, though, of course, as we mentioned...
How do they know Jesus spoke Aramaic or Aramaic? That is cool and weird at the same time. I don't know how.
Syria's history has never been short of complicated, which brings us to the current situation of the civil war and crisis. Now, although this isn't even a sliver in the grand picture of Syria, we still, of course, have to cover it in this episode because it's kind of a big deal. We're not going to sidestep it. Depending on who you talk to, Syrians both in and out of Syria will have a lot to say about the current state of affairs of their home country. I asked you guys, the Syrian geography peeps, to kind of explain a little bit, and more or less, you all kind of came to these conclusions. What it boils down to is pretty much everybody on all sides wishes things could be better. They just all have different opinions on how to get to that better. There's no simple way to summarize it, but many might say that it all starts with two main factors: the proposition for construction of an oil pipeline from Qatar to Europe through Syria, and the Arab Spring uprisings that took place in 2011. Basically, both sides claim the other side was the instigator. Those that are against Assad will say,
Assad and his family have been ruling as dictators since 1971, and he responded violently, hurting protesters, and then he did it again.
And yet those that support Assad will probably say something like,
yeah, well, Western powers infiltrated in the Arab Spring, supplied protesters with weapons.
And there's a lot more factored into this, but in the end, everything got super messy. Some soldiers defected and created a new rebel army, and then ISIS and Al-Qaeda got involved. All while this was happening, the Kurds were like,
yeah, we figured something like this might happen, and we are not letting them touch our communities. Time to secede.
Then it gets even more complicated, considering that Iran and Russia supported the Assad regime, whereas the GCC states and the US supported the rebels, effectively making a proxy war. Essentially, since 2016, this whole crisis and civil war led to the largest refugee population in the world since the Rwandan genocide. Now, there are so many layers that go into this, but everyone can agree that it has put Syria through a lot of strain, and everyone is understandably sick and tired of it. But one thing Syrians don't get tired of is sports. No way to tactfully transition, so may as well just do a sharp pounce. Now, usually Art fills in for this segment, but he is currently spending time with his family for the holidays. So let's bring in Gabs to fill in for the segment. Remember we went to Finland? That was awesome.
That was the best time of my life. I haven't done anything fun since then. Syrians and sports, yes. For any major sporting event in Syria, there's no better place than the Abbasian Stadium.
Aisha! I know that doesn't look big on camera, but in person,
in Damascus. It is the home of their national soccer or football team, as well as staging area for the couple of Pan-Arab Games. Latakia also hosted the 10th Mediterranean Games. Like most countries, soccer or football is their favorite sport. These two guys probably being their most world-renowned players. Their national football team has qualified for 4 Asian Cup competitions. Otherwise, they show interest in other forms of athletics.
No, really?
Yeah, they do. I swear. Yeah. In the Olympics, they have 2 bronze medals in boxing and weightlifting, 1 silver in wrestling, and 1 gold medal in the Summer Olympics. Their only gold medalist today being Gadashua. Syria was so proud as she finished the women's heptathlon in 1996. Nice. Finally, at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, which took place in 2021 due to the pandemic, obviously, Hensaza at age 11 became the youngest Olympian in more than 50 years competing in table tennis. Hopefully some of their athletes will get endorsed and have their faces on.
That just shows us minors and youngsters we can do stuff. Some can't.
Cereal boxes?
Oh! Thank you, Gabs. In any case, Syria's culture extends beyond athletics. The first alphabet was created and discovered here. Weddings can be crazy. Some groups have a ketbet, and it's usually followed by an arkada, and they prick the groom with pins, and women step on the toes of the bride, followed by a sword fighting banquet. Each group has something special and unique. To talk a little bit more about the backstory of their culture, here's Random Hannah with culture stuff.
Vaping can deliver toxic metals like nickel and lead into your lungs. That's metal in your lungs.
Don't vape.
Hey everyone, I'm back. Did you miss me? Well, you can always have me on a Random Hannah shirt at geographynow.com. So Syrian culture wildly parallels that of other Levantine nations in that you'll find a more Mediterranean vibe rather than an Arab one. And everywhere in Syria, you'll probably encounter the traditional Bahra house with a fountain in the middle courtyard. Occasionally, you might spot men wearing a shirwa or a tarbush and women with traditional kaftan worn at special events. Speaking of which, Syria is famous for their silk called damask, or Damascus brocade fabric. Syrians are well known in the arts and craft world as well. You can find intricately patterned wooden mosaic woodcraft in every marketplace. And it's believed that glass blowing was invented in Syria as a way to produce jars and vases faster than traditional clay methods. Syrians have a long-standing...
I'll be right back, guys. I gotta go grab some. God. Dying. Hey. I'm back. Let's begin.
Tradition of holding prominent figures in the literature and arts department in the Arab world. These guys were key players in the Nadha or Arab literature and cultural revival of the 19th century. In addition, Syria is home to a multitude of contemporary artists. This guy, Ali Ferzat, was once the head of the Arab Cartoonists Association. Now all forms of media are state-controlled, and since the Civil War, many artists have been incarcerated. Nonetheless, despite all that, Syria still seems to be right up there with Egypt in terms of popularity in the Arab world with TV shows and dramas. If you'd like to find out more, check out Filmography Now! Finally, there are so many festivals celebrated here, and each people group has their own you can find regionally. They have 2 festivals dedicated to flowers in Latakia and Damascus, a cotton festival, song festival, and a jasmine festival. Certain groups, like the Kurds and Turkmens, celebrate Nowruz. The Assyrians have their own Assyrian New Year. Yazidis might have the Shanjak Parade, and so on. And unfortunately, you know the deal. This is the part where I usually say something like, you can't have a festival without music, and then I scoff as keys. Music intro. Ugh. Join Team Hannah.
You can buy my shirt at geographynow.com. Anyway, music in Syria. Music here goes way back, like super ancient. It's actually said that the first musical notes in the world was actually discovered on ancient clay tablets. It was even played and recorded by Assyrian pianist Malik Jandali. Sorry for the wrong pronunciation. Otherwise, specifically Kudud Halabiya and Muwasha in the city of Aleppo. They are music and poetry styles uniquely developed in Syria. And of course, you can't talk about music without mentioning 2 native instruments, the kanun and ney. The kanun being a trapezoid-shaped zither, and the ney being a narrow wooden flute that has been used for nearly over 5,000 years. Syria is also home to a ton of different styles of traditional dances, the most notable probably being dabke and the al-sama dance, which is more often performed by Sufi Muslims. Otherwise, in a contemporary sense, Syria has lifted up so many many notable singers and artists. Here are a few that you guys have mentioned. If I could send them all out a Keith shirt, I probably would. Everyone says this guy is Sabah Fakhri. He's kind of like the Pavarotti of the Arab world. And finally, like we've discussed in the Saudi Arabia episode, there is a sort of underground metal scene culture thing that goes on in Syria. And it's hard for them to perform because of due to government restrictions. Many Syrian metalheads will probably cite Jack Power as the leading artist that pioneered metal into the country, with his metal covers combining metal with traditional Arab instruments. All right, that's it for me, guys. I'm out. Woo. Don't buy Hannah's shirt. Stay Keith, everybody.
Woo! Thank you, Keith. Well, so we've covered quite a bit. The land of a million stories. And part of that complex story involves outside countries that have played a role in their history. Let's discuss Syria's global interaction in... Now, despite all the recent well-known drama, Syria still has their way of dealing with the outside. You don't live in the cradle of civilization without being able to know a thing or two when it comes to international affairs and diplomacy. You have to understand, when you ask which countries Syria is close to, it really depends on who you ask, and often you'll notice that there's a huge difference between what the government claims versus what the average everyday citizen claims, and which group within the citizens you're asking. But here's the motion graphic.
As an Arab nation, of course, they used to be a member of the Arab League, but had their status suspended since 2011 when the Civil War broke out. Nonetheless, Syrians still have their buddies, Arab or not. For one, South America has had its eye on Syria for a while, specifically Brazil and Venezuela. Brazil was the first country in the Americas to give humanitarian visas to Syrian refugees seeking asylum during war times. Brazil actually has the highest number of Syrians in diaspora at about 4 million, if you include multi-generational families and those of partial descent. In addition, Venezuela not only has politically aligned with Syria's government for a long time, but also has many in diaspora as well. Even their former Vice President Tarek El-Aissami is of Lebanese-Syrian descent. Now, a little closer to home, if you ask the Syrian government, they will probably state that Russia and Iran are their closest and in some cases most strategic allies. This was very evident when they sided with Iran against Iraq in the Iran-Iraq War, as they shared a common animosity against Saddam Hussein. In addition, Syria has been friends with Russia for a long time, and especially during the Assad rulership. Russia has naval ports leased out in Tartus and has been a key figure in supporting Assad's government in the Syrian civil war. Syria even offers Russians war tours. If you ask the people, though, you might get a few other answers depending on who you ask. Many Syrians might say Algeria is a close friend. In fact, after Algeria gained independence from France, many Syrians came in to help reteach Algerians Arabic, as it was banned from the country for over 100 years. In addition, Algeria often acts as the go-to mediator for any conflicts. Since the refugee crisis, though, Turkey has taken in the most refugees at over 3.5 million as of 2021, costing them over $8 billion in aid. Although the process hasn't been perfectly smooth, as it has put a stress on the nation to some degree, nonetheless, Turkey has stepped up the most in regards to the crisis. When I asked you guys, the Syrian geograpeeps, who you thought the best friends of Syria were, though, no shocker, most of you ended up saying your fellow neighbors in the Levant: Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestinians. Some of you even included Iraq. The Levant countries overall get each other the best. They've shared the longest histories, their dialects are very similar, and their cultures are incredibly intertwined. Lebanon actually hosts the second largest Syrian refugee population at about 1.1 million, which is about 1/5 of their entire population. Jordan once did try to take over Syria in the 20s, but otherwise they've been really cool with each other. Jordan also usually acts as the conduit between Syrians and Palestinians when they want to either do business or just see each other, as Israel's borders have been closed off since the conflict. And Iraq and Syria have always been the two powerhouse cradles of civilization countries. Overall, when you put these countries all together, they can't help...
In the 1920s, 1920s, Syria and Jordan were under rule. Syria is under French rule, and Jordan was under British rule. I don't get it.
help but deny that they are incredibly close and they'll always be there for each other.
In conclusion, with Syria, you get something kind of like the Aleppo soap. You get a country that's been around for a long time, and it's still going on in the 21st century, and it's still precious and valued amongst its people just the way it is. And maybe, just maybe, the outside world should see it that way too. Alright, that's it with all the S countries. Stay tuned. The first T country, Tajikistan, is coming up next.
That is it. I think I might end the stream right here. How long have I been streaming for? Around just hit 2 hours. So, yeah. Obviously, that corn up 3840 got me into this YouTube stuff when he got really successful. Slow start, but it's working. Anyways, we are going to end today's stream. Go watch that corn up 3840 stream and give him support. Subscribe to my channel and his channel if you're not.